Welcome back, friends. This is John Hart, the Heart of Appalachia. Pull up a chair, keep your feet off the coffee table, and today we're going to talk about the mob the South tried to forget. And this is a feature-length true crime podcast told in the voice of John Hart. The Deep South has a shadow most folks pretend not to see, a shadow that moves from county to county, never staying long, never needing a name. But if you lived anywhere between the Gulf Coast and the Tennessee line, Biloxi, McNairy County, Phoenix City, Birmingham, you heard the whisper, the Dixie Mafia. Not a family, not a hierarchy, not a code of honor, just a loose network of thieves, killers, arsonists, and men who believed the law was something that happened to other people. They didn't build empires. They didn't carve out territories. They just took what they wanted. And if you got in their way, you didn't get in their way long. Tonight we're stepping into that shadow. The Dixie Mafia didn't rise out of the mountains. It rose out of Biloxi, Mississippi, a place where money washed in like the tide. In the 1950s and 60s, Biloxi was a playground for hustlers, illegal casinos, backroom card games, sheriffs who took envelopes instead of oaths, politicians who smiled for the camera and shook hands with criminals behind closed doors. And in the middle of it all were the men who would become known as the Dixie Mafia. They weren't organized, they weren't disciplined, they were opportunists, wolves who realized the South was full of unlocked doors. They robbed banks, they burned buildings for insurance, they ran prostitution rings, they hijacked trucks, and they killed without hesitation. And they did it across 7 states, a shadow with no borders. The Dixie Mafia had one rule, just one: don't snitch. No oaths, no ceremonies, no blood rituals, just silence. If you talked, you died. If you thought about talking, you died. If someone suspected you might talk someday, you died. Fear was the glue that held the whole thing together, and it worked for decades. If the Dixie Mafia was the shadow, the state line mob was the fist. They operated along the Mississippi-Tennessee border, a stretch of highway dotted with rose houses, motels, strip joints, and gambling dens, a place where a man could lose his money, his pride, or his life before sunrise. They were violent, they were ruthless, and they were deeply connected to the Dixie Mafia. Together they formed a southern criminal ecosystem, one that fed on corruption, fear, and the silence of small towns that didn't want trouble. But trouble was coming, and it had a badge. Buford Pusser wasn't a myth when he started. He was just a big man with a bigger sense of right and wrong. When he became sheriff of McNairy County, Tennessee, he walked straight into the heart of the state line mob's territory, and he didn't blink. He raided their bars, he shut down their brothels, he smashed their slot machines with a stick of hickory. He arrested their men and dared them to come for him. And they did. They shot him, they stabbed him, they ambushed him on the highway, they tried to burn him out, but Buford kept coming. A lawman in a land where law didn't mean much. August 12, 1967, a night that still echoes. Buford and his wife Pauline were driving down New Hope Road when a car pulled alongside them. Gunfire erupted, a burst of violence in the dark. Pauline was killed instantly. Buford was hit in the face, the jaw, the neck, but somehow he crawled out of the car, bleeding and furious, and survived. He named the men he believed were responsible: Towhead White, Kirksey Nix, George McGann, Gary McDaniel, all Dixie Mafia connected. None were ever convicted. Some died violently, some disappeared, some lived long enough to deny everything. But the shadow remained. If the ambush on Buford Pussler was the Dixie Mafia's most infamous act of violence, the murder of Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret was their most cold-blooded. Biloxi, 1987. Judge Sherry was a respected man, a former Marine, a circuit court judge. His wife Margaret was a city councilwoman, a reformer, a woman who believed Biloxi could be better. But Biloxi was still a city with shadows, and one of those shadows was Kirksey McCord Nix Jr., a Dixie Mafia figure serving life at Angola. From behind bars, Nix ran a Lonely Hearts extortion scam, a scheme that brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars, money meant for bribes, money meant for influence, money meant for escape. And then the money went missing. Nix believed Judge Sherry had stolen it. He hadn't. The real thief was Sherry's former law partner, Pete Halott, who blamed the missing funds on the judge to save himself. Nix ordered the hit. Mike Gillich, a Biloxi underworld figure, arranged it. A hitman named Thomas Holcomb pulled the trigger. Judge Sherry was shot multiple times. Margaret was killed too, because she was home, because she saw, because the Dixie Mafia didn't leave witnesses. The city shook, the South shook, and for once the shadow left footprints. It took years, but the truth came out. Halott went to prison. Gillich turned informant. Holcomb was convicted. And Nix, the man who ordered it all, was finally held accountable. But the damage was done. Two good people were dead, a city was broken, and the Dixie Mafia had written its darkest chapter. The Sherry murders weren't the only blood on the Dixie Mafia's hands. There were arson for hire jobs, insurance fraud fires that burned whole blocks, bank robberies that left bodies behind, sheriffs who vanished, witnesses who never made it to court, business owners who refused to pay protection and paid with their lives. The Dixie Mafia didn't kill for power. They killed for convenience, for money, for silence, and sometimes just because someone annoyed them. By the late 1980s and 90s, the Dixie Mafia began to fracture. Federal pressure increased, sheriffs got smarter, states coordinated, and the old wolves aged out. Some died in shootouts, some went to prison, some just faded into the back roads they came from. But their legacy, the violence, the corruption, the fear, still lingers in the places they touched. Small towns remember, families remember, the South remembers. The Dixie Mafia wasn't a family, it wasn't an organization, it was a brotherhood. It was a shadow, a dark shape that moved across the deep South, taking what it wanted and leaving scars behind. Phoenix City had its own demons. Buford Pussler had his war. Judge Sherry paid the ultimate price. And the Dixie Mafia, they were the thread that tied 1,000 quiet tragedies together. The South never forgets its shadows. And some stories, the violent ones, the dangerous ones, stay alive long after the men who lived them are gone. This has been the Dixie Mafia, the mob the South tried to forget, told by John Hart. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and follow. Until then, God bless you, and I'll see you on down the road.